Hey, hi, hello, my name is Lydia. Welcome to my channel. If you are interested in true crime like I am, I hope you stick around. A special hello and thank you to my returning subscribers. I hope you know how happy I am to have you here. The case that I'm bringing to you today was brought to me by simply standing in the grocery store checkout line. When I saw this issue of People magazine, hopefully you can see, and I saw the haunted look of the woman, the brave survivor in this case on the cover, I just had to learn more. And I did. It's a serial killer case that I had not heard of before, and it is a harrowing story. It was a case from the 1980s that frustrated investigators because it sat unsolved for over 30 years. And then a magical thing called DNA entered the picture, and justice was finally served. You may have heard of this case being referenced as the Colorado Hammer Killer. I call it Welcome to a Story about another piece of shit human, Alex Ewing. After a string of brutal attacks, all happening within a 2-week time span in early 1984, including several assaults and 4 murders, an FBI criminal profiler developed a profile of the killer that they were searching for. Eventually, that profile would indeed match the culprit, although he would not be found responsible for the attacks and the murders until much later. Years and years. Decades later. The FBI profiler wrote that this suspect was an unsophisticated burglar who found his victims by chance. The burglar would simply go into neighborhoods which he was familiar with and find open doors or open garages. If he was able to get into a house easily, by window, by door, or by garage, he stole cash or things that he could easily exchange for cash. He couldn't steal more expensive items because he had no way of exchanging them for cash without raising suspicion. And he couldn't pawn the items because they would be reported as stolen property. This criminal was not a stalker. He attacked at random and when he could find an easy way in. But he would be a criminal who would use violence. Violence would be in his background in some form or another. Because of this, the criminal would be prepared with a weapon when he broke into a house. His weapon would be crude and easily accessible to him, a weapon which he was familiar with, a weapon like a hammer. The FBI theorized that his criminal behavior would evolve and that his efforts would be fueled by rage. The attacker would be quick to get angry, and he would do so at random. He would likely enter a house and launch an attack right away. He would want to disable any homeowners or anybody else he found in the house immediately. The FBI profiler said he was likely a male and likely young, maybe in his mid-20s, maybe a little bit younger, maybe a little bit older. He was likely not well educated, and he was likely not going to stop unless he was stopped by someone else. At the time, the profile suggested that the police concentrate on the various construction workers who were working in the area on various construction projects which were being built around the location of the attacks. The town of Aurora, Colorado, the main location of these crimes, was booming, and houses and other buildings were going up all the time. And in fact, this profile matched drifter and sometimes construction worker Alex Ewing. Alexander Christopher Ewing was born on August 14, 1960, and he grew up in Sacramento, California. Ewing worked off and on in construction, and he was living and working in Denver, Colorado around the time of the attacks. He had a long background as a criminal. His first known arrest was at the age of 18 or 19 when he was arrested for burglary in California. Later that same year, in 1979, he was arrested for burglary in Florida. Also in that same year, he was arrested for grand theft and burglary in Arizona. He had crossed the entire country back and forth, with nothing but crime in his wake. Stealing was just his way of life. It was how he got by. Ewing was arrested again the following year in 1980, again for burglary. In 1981, the state of California issued a fugitive arrest warrant for him. By 1982, they had found him, and he was arrested and charged with trespassing and burglary. When he wasn't able to survive off what he stole, Ewing worked in construction, in a variety of positions, including plumbing work. But in 1984, his crimes escalated from just burglary to physical attacks on his victims, and then sexual assault, and ultimately murder. Aurora, Colorado is a town located at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. Just east of Denver, Aurora is currently Colorado's third largest city. Home to breathtaking views, Aurora was originally developed as a military town, and it has been growing ever since. In the 1980s, new neighborhoods were springing up everywhere, and many couples and families led quiet and peaceful lives in warm houses, tucked inside from the sometimes snowy weather. Aurora was a place where people felt like they could leave their door unlocked or their garage open, and that's what some people did. One such couple was Jim and Kim Habenshield, and the attack on them introduces the killer we are talking about today. The attack happened on January 4th, 1984, in Aurora, Colorado. The couple was newly married, and they had been in their brand new home for around 6 months. The couple was young. Kim was only 21 years old at the time, but that cold winter night, they had awoken at 2:30 a.m. to find a man in their dark bedroom. He began hitting them both with a hammer. When the couple arose and confronted the shadowy man, he threw the hammer at them and he fled the house. The couple survived, although they both had injuries to the head, and Jim had a skull fracture. No fingerprints were found on the hammer that was left at the scene, and the couple could not tell the police what the man looked like or what he sounded like because he had not spoken at all. Days later, on the evening of January 10, 1984, police believe that Ewing entered the unlocked garage of Donna Holm, a flight attendant who lived about 25 miles away, still in Aurora, with her pilot boyfriend, Ron. As Donna arrived home, pulling into the garage and exiting the vehicle, she was brutally attacked by a man with a hammer. She was knocked unconscious and she was assaulted. She was assaulted right there in the garage on the floor. 24 hours later, Donna was found in her bedroom, dazed, confused, and not remembering anything by her boyfriend who had come home. She remembered nothing of the attack, but the hammer and the blood was found in the garage. Investigators think that in her state of unconsciousness, when she awoke, she thought that she had perhaps injured herself, and in a very confused, dazed state, she had wandered back into her house and simply went to bed. Donna thankfully survived. Unfortunately, the victim of Ewing's next attack did not. Patricia Smith was a 50-year-old grandmother and an interior designer. As you can tell by her photos, she was a striking woman who had great style. She lived in a townhome with her daughter and grandchildren in Lakewood, Colorado, a town close to Aurora. Her family describes Patricia as a loving mother and grandmother, a charming woman who had a smile for everyone. She had grown up on a farm in Nebraska, where locking your doors was just not something that anyone did. On the very same day that Donna Holmes was attacked, earlier that day, on January 10, 1984, Patricia Smith was just home alone, eating lunch, and minding her own business. Safe in her own home, she thought, of course. Alex Ewing entered her home, found her in the kitchen, beat her with a hammer, and sexually assaulted her. Her body was found partially nude, legs spread apart, and a blanket covering her head. Patricia was found by her daughter and grandchildren. She had been dead for several hours, and a hammer was found at the scene. Her house had been robbed as well, and the garage door had been left open. Patricia's murder remained unsolved for nearly 4 decades. It is thought that this was Ewing's first murder, although that cannot really be known for sure. Alex Ewing was a piece of crap, and he had been doing awful criminal things for years and years prior to 1984. But this murder, the murder of Patricia Smith, seems to have broken the seal for Alex Ewing's depravity. He had now killed someone, definitely killed someone, not just had left them broken and bleeding. And you know what? He was okay with doing it again. The Bennetts were a happy family, a young family who lived in Aurora, Colorado. Deborah, 26, and Bruce, 27, had just moved into their new ranch home in their new subdivision neighborhood in 1983, only 2 months earlier. Bruce and Deborah both worked at their family-owned furniture warehouse, and they were proud that they were homeowners at such a young age. They were also proud of their 2 young children, who were the lights of their lives. Melissa Bennett was 7 years old, a pretty girl with light brown hair. Vanessa Bennett was only 3 years old, a cute little girl whose bright smile just lit up the family's photos. Melissa was 7 years old, but her 8th birthday was coming up, and on the night of January 16th, 1984, her grandmother had stopped by to give her an early birthday gift. The family had shared a chocolate birthday cake and had sung happy birthday. There was a fresh layer of snow on the ground outside, and the Colorado neighborhood looked magical, with warm lights coming from all the houses, twinkling against the snow that had fallen on the ground. Everything was right with the world. But that sense of contentment would only last a few more hours, and then it would be gone forever. Sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. that night, Alex Ewing entered the home through an unlocked garage door. He was likely looking for things to steal, and perhaps to release his violence as well. Whether the house was empty of people or not, Alex Ewing did not care. He would get what he came for. He wasn't going to leave if the homeowners were home and discovered him. It was just another opportunity for Alex Ewing to be evil. Vanessa, at only 3 years old, had no memory of the attack that took place that night in her home, but she was the only member of her family that survived. Bruce, her father, was later found with his throat cut, and both Deborah, her mother, and Melissa, her sister, had been beaten to death with a hammer. They were also sexually assaulted. A butcher knife, which was also used in the attack, had been taken from the Bennett's own kitchen. And Alex Ewing didn't shy away from doing the exact same things to Vanessa, even at her young age of 3 years old. She was beaten as well, and she was sexually assaulted. When he left, Ewing probably thought that Vanessa was dead as well, but he was wrong. Vanessa had survived. The next morning, when Deborah and Bruce did not show up at their place of work, the furniture warehouse, the police were called. And thankfully, they found Vanessa alive and were able to take her to the hospital right away to get treatment for her numerous injuries. She had been found laying, along with her bloody teddy bear, wedged between her bed and the wall, and she was unconscious. She had been beaten with a hammer and had serious injuries to her skull, her face, her arms, and her legs. She was in a coma for weeks, and when she finally woke up, she had no memory of that night. She could barely remember her house at all. It was all just fuzzy memories. And when the investigators went into the Bennett family home, they discovered a bloody crime scene. Police surmised that Bruce had probably awoken in the middle of the night, hearing an intruder enter the house. When he had gone to investigate, he had probably confronted the intruder on the stairs. And that was where Bruce had been attacked, right there on the staircase in the home. It was apparent that he had struggled mightily to protect his family. The rest of the family had been found upstairs, and the crime scene photos from the bedrooms were horrifying. The investigators who had to sift through the home and collect evidence and stand guard over the property were left traumatized. One comment from a police officer was that it was the first time that he had entered a crime scene and actually smelled fear. Investigators took and saved as much evidence as they could, and it would come in handy much later. They discovered that the house had also been ransacked and items had been stolen, but no suspects could be found. There was no one who knew the family and would want to harm them. The police settled on a theory that the killer was someone who had found this family at random. While little Vanessa was recovering in the hospital, her attacker left town. Likely feeling the heat from a ramped-up police investigation in the area, where the police were looking for construction workers, which the killer was, Alex Ewing left Colorado and headed to Arizona. And Ewing would have been correct to do so. At this point, the police departments were sharing their notes, and they had come to the conclusion that indeed they were dealing with a spree killer. Someone who had committed all of the above crimes. One killer. One attacker. Ewing, now in Arizona, without any of the tools he had access to in Colorado, including hammers, he needed either a place to hide out, or things to steal so he could make money and live, or a way to release his violence, or all three. So he entered the isolated home of Roy Williams in Kingman, Arizona. On January 27, 1984, Roy Williams was sleeping in his bedroom when Ewing attacked him with the best weapon he could find on short notice, a 25-pound slab of granite, a rock. Ewing hit Roy in the head and on the chest, cracking a rib. Awaking with a start, after being viciously attacked in his own bedroom, Roy yelled out, "What did you do that for? I didn't do anything to you." You gotta love Roy Williams. Mid-attack, however, Ewing decided to run. And the result of this attack was that Alex Ewing was arrested for attempted murder. Roy had survived the attack, and the police who arrived on the scene suspected that Alex Ewing was close by somewhere. He was probably hiding, and it was a remote property. There really weren't many places to hide. This was the Arizona desert. And thankfully, Alex Ewing had left shoe prints in the dirt. Soon after the attack, a suspicious drifter was questioned, and the shoe prints matched. It was Alex Ewing. Alex Ewing was finally in jail and awaiting for his trial to start for the attack on Roy Williams. But due to a jailhouse population issue, on August 9, 1984, 7 months after his arrest, Alex and other inmates were being transported to another location. They were going to another location in Nevada, a neighboring state. And on that transfer drive, the prison van had stopped at a Nevada gas station for a bathroom break. Alex Ewing was able to escape, and he fled on foot. And that very night, Alex Ewing, the escaped inmate, found another opportunity to break into a home. And this time, it would be his last attack ever. Nancy and Chris Barry were asleep in their home in the town of Henderson, a town outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. Ewing snuck into their house and beat the couple with an old axe handle, the best thing that he could find on short notice. The couple was beaten badly, but were able to fight off Ewing until he fled. Nancy's call into 911 dispatch was heartbreaking. "Hurry," she told the dispatcher. "We're dying. We're dying." Fortunately, the couple survived, though the scene of the attack was bloody, just like the other crime scenes. The couple's injuries were serious. Both of Nancy's arms had been broken. But the couple's 2 young children, who were also in the home at the time of the attack, were thankfully unharmed. They included an infant and a 2-year-old, and thankfully they had not been touched. Hopefully Alex Ewing never even knew that they were in the home. Nancy and Chris Barry were able to identify their assailant as a white male, and the weapon, that axe handle, had been left behind. Escaped inmate and 2-time attempted murder suspect, at least that's all the police knew at this point, they hadn't yet linked him to the crimes and the murders in Aurora, was on the loose again. The police went on a massive manhunt, searching for the attacker. But again, all they really had to track him were footprints. The footprints led the police into the Arizona wilderness. Alex Ewing was in the wind. However, that was not for long. And it was only a few days until Alex Ewing was captured. He had been hiding out in the hot Nevada desert, and this time it was for good. He never again escaped police or prison custody. On February 28, 1985, Alex Ewing was convicted on all the counts of attempted murder, and he was sentenced to 110 years. And that was almost the end of the story. The killer had been imprisoned, but he had not been found guilty of his most heinous crimes. He was in jail, but in effect, he had gotten away with murder. And then came the year 2013. That was the year that the state of Nevada passed a new law requiring all offenders in the state be DNA tested. And Alex Ewing was finally swabbed for his DNA in 2018. At the time, he was 57 years old and being held at Northern Nevada Correctional Center in Carson City, Nevada. He was serving his prison term for 2 counts of attempted murder. And after 34 years of being incarcerated, Alex Ewing was all of a sudden the main suspect in not 1, but 2 home invasions that resulted in murder. And up until that point of identification in 2018, there was a possibility that Ewing may have been able to be released on parole. He was already preparing for and anticipating a life outside of prison. He had even set up a dating profile. More on that later. In the 80s, the authorities may have failed to connect the attacks of Roy Williams and the couple Nancy and Chris Barry due to the weapons used. After Ewing had fled from Colorado, he had discarded the hammer that he used in the murders, and he had used whatever he could find instead. In one case, a granite slab, and in the other case, an axe handle. But DNA got him in the end. DNA technology was not available in the 1980s when his crimes were committed. Fortunately, the evidence from the murders had been properly stored and tucked away, and they had been kept all those years. Going back a little bit in time now, in March 2001, that was when the Colorado Bureau of Investigation had given the police at the Aurora, Colorado department the good news that they had in fact constructed a full DNA profile of the killer based on the evidence that had been stored and finally analyzed. 17 years after the string of attacks occurred, they had their killer, they just didn't know who he was or where he was. So in 2001, that DNA information was uploaded to the National DNA Database. They had the killer's blood type and they had the killer's full DNA profile, and now it was just a waiting game. But no match immediately appeared, and unfortunately it was quite a while, quite a long time of waiting until a killer was finally identified. As I told you before, that long time of waiting ended in 2018. Alex Ewing's DNA matched the DNA profile that had been waiting for its match all the way since 2001 and further back since 1984. And when it matched in July of 2018, Colorado detectives went to talk to Ewing, who was being held in that Nevada prison. In an interview with Ewing, the Colorado detectives showed him a picture of Patricia Smith. the 50-year-old grandmother and interior designer who was killed while she was simply eating lunch in her own home. Ewing said he knew nothing about that crime and said that there must have been a mistake. Of course, there was no mistake, but the detectives now had their suspect, and the only charges which could be brought that could stand the test of time, the more than 3 decades since the crimes were committed, were the murder charges. But Ewing was not going back to court without a fight. He had his lawyer contest his extradition from Nevada back to the state of Colorado. It took over 2 years for that to finally happen after the case went all the way to the Nevada Supreme Court. And then he was taken to Colorado to face justice. In August of 2021, Alex Ewing was found guilty and convicted on 6 counts related to the murders of the Bennett family: 27-year-old Bruce Bennett, 26-year-old Deborah Bennett, and 7-year-old Melissa Bennett. Ewing was also found guilty of attempted murder of Vanessa Bennett, the 3-year-old girl who had been also assaulted, beaten with a hammer, and left for dead. The DNA evidence that had connected Ewing to the crime scene at the Bennett's house was semen collected from the bedrooms of Melissa and Vanessa, and areas of blood which were found throughout the home. 87-year-old Connie Bennett, the grandmother of Vanessa and Melissa, was also able to testify during the trial. Ewing received 3 consecutive life sentences as a result of the trial, and witnesses in the courtroom say that he never flinched. He never looked up. He was simply shackled again and led out of the courtroom. Vanessa Bennett, who was only 3 years old at the time of the attack, suffered not only debilitating physical injuries, but emotional and psychological ones as well, including depression, anxiety, anger issues, and eventually problems with drug abuse. She never felt comfortable in her own skin, and at the age of 20, she was diagnosed with PTSD and bipolar disorder. When the murderer of her family was finally identified, Vanessa had been living under a bridge, homeless, in Tucson, Arizona. In her victim impact statement at Ewing's trial in 2021, Vanessa stated the following. She said, "My family was the most important thing to me in the whole world. I didn't just lose my parents and my sister. I lost my trust in people and my dignity and pride. I lost the person I was supposed to be." In a July 2022 interview, Vanessa feels that she is finally on her way to healing. She is in a good relationship and she wants to be a drug counselor. She wants to help other people and other victims who are struggling. She says she is unbreakable. She says she is a survivor, and she is. After his conviction in the Bennett family case, Alex Ewing was brought to trial again, this time for the murder of Patricia Smith. After a failed start in October 2021, which resulted in a mistrial when Ewing was granted a mental competency evaluation, Ewing was taken to trial again in April 2022. That most recent trial, and likely the last, resulted in a conviction on 3 counts related to the assault and the murder of 50-year-old Patricia Smith. The counts were murder in the first degree after deliberation, felony murder committed during a robbery, and felony murder committed during a sexual assault. The DNA which sealed his fate was semen evidence collected from the victim's body, the carpet under her body, and the blanket which was covering her face. A blonde pubic hair, which was also found at the crime scene, was linked to Alex Ewing. At the conclusion of that trial, for the murder of Patricia Smith, Alex Ewing received another life sentence. He is currently serving 4 consecutive life sentences. In a statement to the media that the Smith family gave before the trial had begun, they stated this: 34 years of mystery, sadness, grief, and fear has finally come to a point of a foreseeable and hopeful conclusion for our family. We are also relieved that this suspect has been behind bars for almost the duration of that period. It is difficult to imagine how much more fulfilling our lives would have been if Patricia Smith's life had not been taken from us. Patricia was a beacon of life for our family and a vibrant inspiration of love and laughter to everyone she met. She is missed dearly. And now for the funny part. According to the Las Vegas Review-Journal, Alex Ewing has his profile up on an inmate dating site. He describes himself as an adventurous outdoors type. Really? You've been inside for over 30 years. Almost 40 years. Okay. He describes himself in the following way. I'm looking to meet a woman in her 50s for the purpose of becoming a pen pal friend. I will like a person for themselves. Looks, race, creed, or color does not matter. I'm not looking for someone to support me. Not to sound pathetic, but after doing as much time as I have, a letter, especially from a woman, would mean a lot to me and something to look forward to. I've been no saint in my life, but I want to do better, and I realize I'm still alive by the grace of God. Hey y'all, don't you go out there and rush to sign up to be his pen pal friend. He sounds like such a delight, right? Ridiculous. Here are my final thoughts. Yes, technically this piece of crap has been sitting in jail for 37 years since the time of his crime spree in 1984. That's 37 years of prison time before he was officially identified as the murderer of Patricia Smith and the murderer in the Bennett family crime. But that was 37 years of time on the inside, not sitting in jail in prison as a convicted murderer. Not a convicted murderer and rapist of a 7-year-old girl, and a rapist of another 3-year-old girl. His 37 years of prison time up until 2021 would have been a much harder and much more difficult time had that been the case. Murderers and rapists of little girls don't do well in prison. And since these convictions in 2021 and 2022 have finally occurred, and both the whole world and his fellow inmates now know what kind of evil Alex Ewing actually is, I can only hope that the rest of his time in prison, which may be lots of years to come, is much worse than it already has been. We shall see. But at least he is never getting out of jail, and he has finally been held to account for most of the horrible things that he did. The Colorado Hammer Killer has finally been identified, and I hope that brings the victims' families, at least a little bit of peace. The following is a list of the victims of Alex Ewing. May they rest in peace, and may their families and their friends find peace as well. Thank you so much for your time in watching this video. I know that your time is valuable, and I appreciate that you spent some of it watching this story with me. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I'm always interested in hearing what you have to say. And if you have made it all the way to the end of this video, I appreciate you even more. If you would like to hear more true crime cases from me, I hope you would consider subscribing. And hey, I'm also thinking about doing a Q&A style video. I love hearing a little bit about you when you tell me about yourself in the comments below, but you probably don't know a lot about me. So if you have any questions, just ask in the comments below. But until next time, everyone, please take care out there. Really, everyone take care. I'll be thinking about you. See you next time. Bye-bye.